Welcome back. So Eric Ries is, well, everyone knows, right? He's the author and the creator of The Lean Startup, which is a true phenomenon in the Valley and in the world of business these days. And we're really happy to have you and to be able to talk to you for a few minutes about kind of the experience of The Lean Startup. One thing I want to get at is, to just start off, where did this idea, this kind of synthesis that you pulled off in the book and on the blog that the book spawned from, where did all these ideas that you kind of drew together come from?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and hi, everybody. I mean, really, you hear this story, this theme all day. It came from failure. And I know, when you're a professional expert, you're not supposed to say things like this, but just as a matter of disclaimer, almost every single product I have ever built or worked on in my whole career has been a colossal failure. And so it's like, if you follow me, you too can be a colossal failure. I know. That's why you don't say things like that, but that's the truth. And so there's no way I would be doing what I'm doing now if I'd gotten lucky and any of those products had really been successful. And so I was always, I was an engineer by training. I was a programmer, and I always thought that better technology would yield better results, better impact, more whatever. So I was always looking for technical solutions to what was actually a very human problem that most of these products that I built, although they're technically excellent, are not actually being used by anybody, even as we speak, sitting on a shelf somewhere in disuse. If there was a technical solution to that problem, believe me, I would have been very happy to discover it. But so I tried, pulling ideas in from agile software development and trying to, improve the architecture, improve the agility of the organizations I worked at, and yet none of those ideas were really helping. And so I had to kind of go beyond what was considered a technical problem and start to get into, well, how do we figure out what it is that customers actually want? And how do we figure out, as a startup that doesn't even know who our customers are, how do we figure out what quality means? Are we making progress? Are we learning things that are important? And so I was really searching for, I figured I would just go read the book on that topic, and then I would know what to do, and it didn't exist. And so I was really, struggling, trying to find ideas that would be helpful. And I call it Lean Startup to acknowledge the debt from lean manufacturing, which was the first kind of comprehensive theory of something that made sense, kind of comported with my kind of intuitive sense of what I was seeing and helped me make sense of the crazy stuff that was happening in the startups I worked at. Right.
So when I want to get into the kind of nuances and framework of what the Lean Startup constitutes, but one of your first failures, so to speak, was there.com, which was, we were just talking about it backstage, and it was fascinating because it was such a big deal at the time. It was this massive, it was a kind of classic 2003, 2004, big, lots of money, lots of big supporters, very talented staff.
Thank you.
And it kind of was this virtual community that debuted to an audience of that people, zero audience, right? People just didn't respond to it. Which is...
Yeah. Yes, true. All 100% true, yes.
But as you said, the people who were working on it were really talented, and they went on to do all these great things. And, and the insight was the kind of experience that was vast.
Absolutely. Look, the total valuation and kind of value creation of all of the startups founded by there people, it's probably $1 billion by now. Really very talented people have gone on to do amazing things because we all shared a really important lesson in what not to do. When I look back at it, look, failure is really painful, and the big embarrassing failure is more than anything else. I cringe thinking about it. It's like such a depressing episode. The very first startup I did, I got to have what I like to call the first half of the movie The Social Network experience. So I was in an Ivy League university, in my dorm building a startup, all our friends. And you know how in the movies when you do startups, there's all those wise people who tell you it's not going to work? And the most satisfying part of the movie at the end is when you get to tell those people that they were wrong. You know, it did work, but like, so got to visualize having to go back to all those people and be like, yeah, you were right. I should not have done that. Didn't work out. So I mean, I had an expensive dot-com bubble kind of experience in college. Luckily, the bubble burst, you know, before I could get in too much trouble, and company failed. And then I did this huge Silicon Valley, you know, massive, huge launch, tons of prominent VCs. And you know, I was not the founder of that. I was a junior person involved in that company. And what was so interesting was it was basically the same failure as the one I had done as a student, only 2 orders of magnitude more expensive. But still the same basic concept. We just assumed we knew what customers would want and acted as if our plan was, you know, had been passed down to us by some kind of divine inspiration. And that, yeah, and we were talking about this backstage. The problem with these stories of failure is that because as the audience, you already know that this company was a failure, everything I say about it will make me sound like an idiot. You're like, well, I can't believe they ever believed that people would do it. It doesn't matter what it is, you know. And the first company I built, one company I built in my dorm, just to be clear, was a company for college students in Ivy League universities to create online profiles for the purpose of sharing. Okay, that turned out to be a pretty good idea. But we wanted to help students get jobs because we wanted to build a real business. So, right? And you're like, what an idiot. I can't believe, right? I understand. It's because you know the outcome, it's impossible to really wrap your mind around the fact that when you are actually in a startup, when you are an entrepreneur, when it's your idea, everything you experience makes you think the idea is better and better and better. And so every person, you get constant positive confirmation because that's just what we are as human beings. We fall in love with ideas. And you know, what I have learned to do and to try and teach other people to do is just it's okay to create that reality distortion field. It's just every once in a while we want to step outside it for a moment and just double check that actually what we're doing is in fact brilliant and we're not just driving a car off a cliff. So just I'm sure you're right. Those of you I know this doesn't apply to you because your idea is brilliant. I understand. But even you who have the most brilliant, just maybe double check just a little bit.
So, but one of the things you're doing with Lean Startup is basically to take those experiences and minimize the, I mean, there's lots of risk in startups, right? It is intrinsic to the task. But you're minimizing the likelihood of failure, you're minimizing the kind of exposure to failure by these kind of rules that you set. And these are the rules that have become, you know, ubiquitous and probably painful to hear a little bit. But things like, you know, the iteration, iterate fast, pivot. So pivot is if your company doesn't work, then quickly change your company and do something else.
Yep.
And the minimum viable product, or MVP, which is sometimes just putting an idea out there, not an actual product, but an idea of what the product might be and seeing if anybody responds to it. That's minimizing the risk quite a bit. You don't even have a product, you're just saying you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you recognize, it all sounds very straightforward because, you know, the logic of this is to be like, look, the core problem of a startup is you don't know who your customer is. You don't know if you're on the path to a sustainable business. You have all these problems. So the unit of progress in a startup is learning, what we call in the startup validated learning, scientific, proven learning that you actually know what you're talking about. And so and that sounds pretty good. Most entrepreneurs at that point are like, yeah, who's not for learning? Everyone's for learning. But if we say, no, that is the unit of progress. Anything else you do that doesn't contribute to learning actually is a form of waste, including building too robust of a product, launching it too big in the press. I mean, launching in the press, classic sign of a startup that's about to fail. I wish I'd get the press to write about that. It would be great. Anyway, sorry. Those things are waste. They don't actually help you learn because if 100 customers don't like your product, then what does it matter what the 101st customer doesn't like your product? What's the learning value of the 1,000th customer or the 100,000th? And so a lot of the companies I've built failed so spectacularly, not because the technology wasn't good or didn't work, but because we literally couldn't get anybody even to try it to tell us how bad it was. Okay? That's the kind of failure that's and so we talk about, well, oftentimes the minimum viable product is simply an experiment that allows customers to sign up. You know, would you even have to create page 2 where you apologize the product's not available yet? Not if nobody signs up. And that's the most common case, actually, is that you can't even get anyone to find out that you haven't built the product yet. And I understand, not your idea, right? That's the problem. I understand. When you are in it, it seems impossible. But that's what we're trying to do. It's not, and people get really fixated on the parts of Lean Startup that fit on a bumper sticker. Okay, the bumper sticker bits are people's favorite parts. Pivot, sorry about that. MVP, I know, it's very time. Iteration. You go on YouTube, there's a very funny video where there's a Lean Startup expert is trying to convince a drug dealer they need to iterate more. Like, it's gotten out of control. I understand. The bumper sticker stuff people love. But the heart of it is trying to apply the scientific method to the process of entrepreneurship itself. So that whatever you have to do as an entrepreneur that will help you learn faster, that's what you do. And sometimes that's as simple as a landing page experiment. Sometimes it's more complicated. And tactics are not what we're trying to teach. We're trying to teach this set of principles about learning and measuring the right things.
Right. So this started, it's a kind of classic story, classic success story of yours. It started as a blog. You had these ideas, you had this experience, you had kind of crystallized this notion. You had the blog and you had a fervent following on the blog, and then you decided to turn it into a book.
Yeah.
And I love this moment that you described in a blog post where the book is available. All this hard work is kind of come to fruition, and the book is available on pre-order on Amazon.
Yeah.
And so you announced your blog followers that it's number 3,000 or something, and if they can please order the book, it would be great. And then you have an update, and you come back to look at Amazon again, and all of a sudden it's at number 3 on Amazon, which it must have been an amazing vindication and kind of.
And for the record, number 1 and number 2 were both George R.R. Martin. Because his publisher had packaged all his old books into a separate SKU from the new book. I thought that was totally cheating. It's not fair. You're not going to beat Game of Thrones, right? That's not fair. So yeah, really should have been done. I'm just kidding. Not that I take it personally, but I've never been so overwhelmed. I mean, it was an incredible thing.
And was that the moment when you knew that you all of a sudden had something that was much bigger than something in Silicon Valley, but something that resonated much larger?
That would make a really good story. I wish that was the
truth.
Go with it. No, I mean, right, I feel like, gosh, that's such a good, thank you for teeing that up. That would be such a good story. But the truth of these things is actually always more boring than what would make a good story. And the truth is, by that time, I already knew. Because the reason that pitch was so successful in getting people to pre-order the book is I had already been spending months practicing getting customers to pre-order the book. The first people who pre-ordered The Lean Startup pre-ordered it a full year, 12 months, before the book was published, when it didn't even have an Amazon listing yet. In fact, I had just signed the publishing contract. I personally took people's money, like through PayPal. I had a web page where you could go and you could pre-order the book. I didn't even really know what the book was going to be about yet. It certainly hadn't been written yet, but look who you're talking to, right? So I felt like I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't do that. So
that was your MVP.
It was my MVP. And if 0 people had pre-ordered the book at that point, I would have called a full halt to the whole process, because I would have been doomed. I would have known, at least then I would have known I was doomed. So I had been practicing, testing constantly both the marketing message of the book and the content of the book together with test readers. I mean, I didn't even know how much to charge people for the book, because in publishing, you don't know how much the book is going to cost until you know how many pages it is. Because, of course, that's going to be the most efficient market-bearing price based on the number of pages, right? So it was, it was a very strange thing to do, to be like, hi, I want you to do something really irrational. I want you to pre-order a book a year before it comes out. Only someone really crazy would do that. But that's the definition of an early adopter, people who wanted to be part of building the thing into a movement.
And how many pre-orders did you have?
What's that? By the time the book came out, we'd sold, I think, 10,000.
Wow.
So a lot, by publishing standards. I know.
What did you do with the money?
Yeah, this is, boy, talk about, don't get me started on publishing. What a backwards industry. No, listen, for the record, I'm a very happy author. I love my publisher. Things have gone great for me, okay? But this is not a good system. I had to pay people to manually enter those orders into Amazon and Barnes & Noble by hand in order to get them to count as official orders for all the publishing, analytics and rankings and stuff. So there was actually this massive, manual, ridiculous process of taking legit, it's not cheating, we're taking real orders from people, take their money, pay the commission, pay somebody to enter the thing onto Amazon again, because there's no good APIs and the whole system is. Anyway.
Okay.
The hardest part of getting this software, I wrote software to do all this testing, and in fact, you can go at lean.st and you can see all the experiments we ran. It's all public now. The hardest part of getting the software written was convincing the engineers who were working on it that this is the way that publishing really works. So I would explain, like, blah, 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 this is the spec of the thing I want written. And they'd be like, well, wouldn't it be better if it worked this other way? I was like, yeah, that's right. That would be better. Good job. You found a better way to do publishing. Anyway, this is how it actually works. So it doesn't matter that you could, and a lot of engineers couldn't take it. It was so irrational. They could, like, we're going to have people, if we're to take the money and have them enter, wouldn't it be better if we integrated with some API? I'm like, yes, it would. Yeah.
All right, well, enough about publishing.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So
dangerous topic.
This idea has gotten so big, and I mean, it's Harvard Business School has done courses on it in the entrepreneur program. Todd Park, the new CTO of the United States, has brought lean startup philosophies to the U.S. government and calls them lean startup.
Yeah.
I mean, this is even bigger than a bestseller normally goes. What do you fathom is behind that enthusiasm?
Listen, no one is more surprised than I am. I mean, really, I'm an engineer. I used to write code for a living, and now I do this for a living. It's like, what is this? I don't know. I mean, honestly, I really don't think it's about me. I really think that there is an incredible hunger in the world for better ideas about entrepreneurship. People have started to get the memo that the future of our civilization depends on getting good at entrepreneurship, because boring jobs are obsolete. There aren't going to be, there's no reason for human beings to do routine work anymore. And if you've been paying attention all day, like every form of routine work is going to be automated. And so the question is, what are people going to do? Like, what are we going to do? Like, we have more productive capacity in our first world civilization than we know what to do with.
But are the people who are responding to the lean startup the same people who need jobs? I mean, those.
Well, not directly. I mean, this is not like everyone who's becoming an entrepreneur is someone who's laid off. But the attractiveness of doing what they call a traditional career path compared to becoming an entrepreneur is really changed, because people who went to go work in supposedly safe industries and supposedly safe companies, take a regular job, I often call them involuntary entrepreneurs. It doesn't say entrepreneur on their business card. It's just all of a sudden the things they used to do that worked great don't work anymore, and now what am I supposed to do? So that problem is really endemic, and the state-of-the-art ideas about entrepreneurship are really bad. I mean, they don't work. I mean, if they did work, we wouldn't need this.
So is that partly why, I mean, so your book is leading the charge, but Reid Hoffman has the Startup of You. I mean, there are all sorts of, there's a whole kind of startup industry that's kind of evolved. And what is resonating with that term? What is so powerful about that idea?
Well, first of all, the idea of being a startup goes through fad cycles, you may have noticed. And we are in, I like to call it, go on my George R. R. Martin theme, and we're in summer, but winter is coming. I always tell entrepreneurs, be ready, winter is coming. Because this entrepreneurship becomes cool and not cool. And we go through these cycles, and sells a lot of magazines, and I'm off, it's great. I understand why that happens. But I think despite that noise, there really is a deep underlying transition in our economy from the age of industrial work to an age of entrepreneurial work. I think that's happening everywhere you look. I call it going back to our friend Karl Marx, right? This is not the ownership of the means of production, it is the rentership of the means of production. If you have a credit card and $50, you can rent the means of production, and today you can have any kind of software thing you want built, any kind of hosting, access, distribution, but soon enough, any physical thing you want manufactured in very low volumes at very low cost. No capital investment required. So this is not capitalism, but something new. And we need a management system that can cope with that reality, and we don't have one yet. And so what we have developed in Lean Startup, I really think of as the tip of the iceberg, but the very beginnings of a movement towards a management science of entrepreneurship. And that's what we need badly.
All right, well, we're going to take some questions. So if we get the mics roving and the hands up, we will make connections as necessary. So why they do that? So I want to get to examples because we haven't touched on any examples yet. So there's some the scrutiny that this idea is getting now, since it's so popular, is, well, okay, show me the proof that this works. Show me the proof that this is actually the way to make a viable company. I mean, we've talked about them, but what are the success stories to your mind?
Well, we have to be super careful here. Whenever you hear a pundit or professional expert speaking, this is the part where they often go off the rails, because there's an incredible temptation. Your incentive as a professional expert, just to go everybody in, is to say things that sound good. That's it. That's the whole incentive. Whether they're true or not doesn't matter. So what sounds good is to be like every great company you already admire, they basically did Lean Startup, but they didn't know it. So Apple, Google, we read every business book. It's like Apple, Google, Southwest Airlines, and Walmart all do this thing. And so I try to...
Zappos.
What's that? Yeah, now Zappos is good. Zappos is my book, as, by the way, as several of those other companies. It's really challenging. So I try hard not to be like, that company's a Lean Startup, that company's... I let the entrepreneurs speak for themselves and speak about the specific techniques that they've used really effectively. So if you look at kind of the famous examples of a pivot that was executed intentionally, not by accident as a crisis, but intentionally, you can look at a company like Groupon, or a company in the news these days, Instagram. If you want to look at examples of the minimum viable product, that's why we talk about Zappos. They put sneakers online by taking pictures at a local shoe store and then being like, hey, if anyone buys these shoes, we'll just like go walk to the shoe store, buy the shoe, and mail it to the customer and be able to test minimum viable product. But the really good examples and the case studies that I really admire in the book are companies you've never heard of because they're just starting. This whole thing is 3 years old. So it's way too early to really have the blockbuster super successes. We're just now starting to see companies like Instagram that were influenced by these ideas, or young enough to have been influenced by these ideas in their formative days, have the kind of success that they've had, companies like Dropbox. But, it remains to be seen really which of these ideas will prove to be the most impactful over the long term. So I try not to get too overheated, too excited about it.
All right.
We will see.
No hands yet.
Stump the audience. That's awesome.
We do have a question from Twitter though. Education recommendations for mid-career non-entrepreneurs whose boring jobs are about to go. So basically, people. That's sad. That's a sad question.
Yeah. Listen, this is a sad phenomenon. I think this is deeply sad that we have people doing work that shouldn't be done. Doesn't need to be done anymore. It's not fit for human consumption, this work. And we all have friends and colleagues that do work every day that's like really crushing and not, doesn't need to be done. And so, yeah, first, the number one recommendation for the person who's in that situation is just to admit that that's what's happening and start to experiment with different things that actually start to measure your own sense of progress by how much value you create for customers and start to do this kind of experimental thinking. The same recommendation, though, by the way, goes for the people who are to blame for the situation, which are the people that employ those people. I think it's a criminally negligent waste of human potential to employ someone in a boring job. It's got to stop. So people who run organizations that are trying to become more entrepreneurial, number one recommendation there is just to have some people in your organization whose business card actually says entrepreneur on it. Let's start to admit that here's someone whose job description is we don't know exactly what they should do. We don't know what the next big thing. Their job is to figure it out. And to kind of acknowledge that as a career path, as a kind of management that needs to get done, that's really important.
All right, we have one here.
My question is, present company not included, but are we rewarding failure too much? What happened to the old days where seems like all the successful startups are people who failed a couple times before, and now they succeeded. And I'm just wondering from, in earlier days, if you didn't make it the first time, that was it, survival of the fittest.
Yeah, we're rewarding failure not enough, actually. I would take the opposite point of view. In fact, if you look at the number one thing, when people are trying to emulate Silicon Valley and in other regional clusters, the number one issue you have to get over is people talk about, oh, it's great to, everyone wants to embrace failure. That's a very trendy thing. But the question is, what does a productive failure look like? It's only a productive failure if you learn something really important from it. So if you look at when VCs invest in failed entrepreneurs, what we want, what VCs want is to find an entrepreneur who learned something critical on somebody else's dime. Right? That's free stuff for you. So what we have to do is embrace productive failure. And the Lean Startup, the method of it, is actually designed to engineer more productive failures faster. Because if we know we're going to have to fail and pivot on the way to success, let's just get it over with as soon as possible, instead of having it happen at the last minute, in a crisis environment. But let's do it by design intentionally.
But how does it work for a company like? I know you're working now with major corporations, Nordstrom's, and others. How does it work inside a company like that? Those companies are so remarkably risk averse.
And that's the problem.
And so how do they do it? Is it Dan's 10% time solution, or?
Listen, I endorse that totally. In fact, we did something called Hack Week at the end of every iteration at my last company. We'd actually take a whole week and just have people work on whatever they wanted. So I do think that's very important. But most big companies are actually drowning in good ideas. What Dan didn't tell you is that if you look at the most common outcome of people tinkering around on something, uncommissioned work in a big company, the most common outcome is they wind up having to quit the company, start their own startup, and make a lot of money, which is great for the entrepreneur, but not so great for the parent company. Well, if you read the literature on the innovator's dilemma and all theory of disruptive innovation, not to be obviously very relevant what we're talking about today, the problem is that it's hard for companies to really commercialize that stuff. So we believe that in the Lean Startup movement, that if you carve out some of your budget, not a lot, but some, for internal entrepreneurs, and you create the right structure around them and hold them accountable in the right way, they can thrive. And so I tell one of the stories from, since I was talking about Intuit, tell a story in the book of a product called SnapTax, which is one of those mobile phone products that a team created at Intuit. You know, 5-person team, not fancy entrepreneurs from the outside, 5 regular employees of Intuit came together with this product where you can literally take a picture with your smartphone of your W-2 and do your taxes in 15 minutes from your phone. I mean, that's a really cool disruptive innovation. And yet, it competes with Intuit's flagship products. It's like classic innovator's dilemma. This should be impossible. But when you talk to that team about how they did it, they described this island of freedom that they had been given to run these experiments. They only had to report to management when they had something new to report. They weren't asked to give updates all the time. They were, and if you look at the metrics they were held accountable to, like the system was set up really well. And I remember a very notable moment when I was interviewing them for the book. I said, well, where did the island of freedom come from? And they're like, huh, I don't know. Never thought about that. Good question. I said, what do you mean good question? That's the only question people want to know the answer to who are reading my book. And I had to go talk to their manager and and eventually, if you walk your way up the hierarchy, you find someone in senior leadership who realized that creating those platforms for experimentation is the key to leadership in big companies in the 21st century. That's the same realization that Todd Park has had in the US government. They can do it at like the Center for Medicare. What's your excuse? That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. All right, well, very good. Please join me in thanking Eric Ries.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.